All right, can you guys see the PowerPoint, the major Italian states? Oh, good. Um, so today we start up our studies of the Renaissance, and we finished up. We're gonna now move on to Europe, and we'll be here for this entire section. Will be about Europe itself. Um, Last time we checked in with Europe, they were just kind of getting out of the feudal age where there were kings on top and then lords. Um, Knights on protecting the lord's property, and then serfs, peasants, poor people who were actually tied to the lord's land and needed the lord's permission to do things like get married, have kids, or get married and like travel. Um, and we said that the Black Plague hits in 1300. So now we're going to see what happens next. And in the 1400s, um, a rebirth of European society happened. They were in these dark ages for 1,000 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, which also was in Italy, in about central Italy. And we're going to see that the Renaissance begins in Italy as well. We discussed that one of the reasons why the Renaissance may have began in Italy is because many of the books from the libraries of Constantinople were moved to Rome after the fall of Constantinople in the mid-1400s. But either way, it also had to do with the fact that Northern Italy had money, okay? This is the area we're talking about today, this area of Northern Italy. And we're gonna find out that Venice and Milan, the city up here, which is in control of this area called Genoa, were probably the two richest city-states of Italy. Okay, and the Renaissance is going to begin in these two rich city-states and also really be centered in this little city-state called Florence. Okay, and starting in Venice, the Venetians had learned that if you sail your ship down the Adriatic Sea and then kind of over here towards the Middle East, that they could trade with the Ottomans. The Ottomans were the powerful group who had just taken over the city of Constantinople, and the Venetians started making a lot of money trading with the Ottomans in Constantinople in the Middle East. And they'd come back, they would trade the stuff they got from the Ottomans with the Italians. They would also go around and trade with the French, the Spanish, eventually up the Spanish coast, and they would trade with the English, the French. So that the Italians really were leaders in trading stuff from the East, from the Ottomans, and bringing it to the West, to the Italians, the French, the English, the Spanish, even the Germans. And in return, oftentimes they would bring cloth made in Europe back to the Ottomans. Venice's trading empire was very profitable and made them a rich state, and of course, with money, oftentimes equals power. Over here in this area, Genoa, Milan, we also see that they had gotten rich and had actually paid people to conquer more land and bring it together. And they were one of the Italian city-states. There were 5 major Italian city-states. You're going to want to know them. You have Milan, Venice, Florence, the Papal States, so that's where the Pope lives, that's Rome itself, and Naples. And Naples is going to be this area down here you see in purple. The Papal States originally controlled all of this land here in central Italy. And Florence is maybe really where the rebirth of Greek and Roman culture takes place, because that's really what's going to happen, is that the Italians are going to rediscover a lot of the ancient writings of the Romans, which were their ancestors, and the art of an architectural style of the Romans, and they're going to copy it. They're going to look back and they're going to read Aristotle and Plato and Socrates. They're going to learn from the past, the ancient civilizations, and they're going to try and bring it back. There was a family in Florence called the Medicis, Okay, and they took control of the Florentine government. But one of the problems that Italy has here is that these Italian city-states don't work together, but instead they fight each other. So the Venetians actually end up teaming up with the papal states around the city of Rome. And this is where the Catholic Church is centered. And they have an alliance. And the Milanese, the people from Milan or Genoa, the Florentines, and Naples down here, Naples, this goes all the way down through Italy, including the island of Sicily, they form an alliance. And really, well, between 1400 and 1450, they're all fighting each other. And then in 1450, they start to have the system of alliances, but they're always fighting each other. The Florentines, they want to take some of this land from the Papal States. The Papal States look to Venice for help. Venice is going to expand down into modern-day Croatia. And history suggests that if these 5 Italian city-states had learned to work together, that Italy could have been a great power similar to that of Rome. They could have been the European power for the next 500 years. But because they fought together, Italy will become weak. You know, it's a lesson that we can learn here in our country, right? Because united we stand, divided we fall. And it's really important that, well, these countries should have stayed united, these city-states. But eventually, one of these leaders, I believe was the leader of Milan, goes over to France, the king of France, and says, hey, will you help us fight against the Venetians and the Papal States? And the king says, sure, that sounds great. And he brings his army down. They march through into Italy. They can't get to Rome, so they come down to Naples and they take it over. And now the French own Naples. Okay? And then the Italians, the Milanese, say, hey, and now the Florentines, they say, hey, Spain, the French moved in. This is the same King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the united Spain, that give Columbus his ships to go, hey, Spain, can you help us get rid of the French? And what happens is that the French and the Spanish fight in Italy over Italian land for the next 50 years. Now, let me tell you something. When there's war going on in your country, there's very little time to have great accomplishments. And this kind of brings an end to the Renaissance in Italy, this warring period. And it's not even anymore the Italians fighting each other. Instead, it's the French and the Spanish fighting in Rome. The Spanish, at one point, I think it was 1520 something, they sack Rome. They go into Rome and they say, we're going to steal this city and we're going to steal all of your gold and we're going to rape and pillage all of your people. Horrible things that take place to the Italians in this period, not even by the Italians. Now it's outside countries coming into Italy, stealing from Italy, killing and raping Italians. But don't forget, the Italians invited them there because they were too busy fighting with each other and decided not to be a united country. So again, what we see in this period is going to be the French invade Italy in 1494. They want control of the Catholic Church. And basically the Spanish and the French will fight for the next 30 years, all the way until like 1559, when all of that fighting finally ends. But Italy is decimated, and Italy will not be a power ever again. I guess maybe in 1871 they unite and they become the power they are today. But Italy's not that powerful. I guess they're kind of powerful, but not that powerful. They could have at one point, with all their money and trade, been incredibly powerful. During this time, there was a guy named Niccolo Machiavelli we want to talk about, and Machiavelli was an advisor for the Prince of Florence. The Medicis. Okay, the Medicis were this rich banker family that lived in Florence, and what they would do is they would hire artists to make beautiful art in their city. So if you look at the city of Florence, and let's just find it just for fun, it is one of the most beautiful cities on earth. And a lot of it are these Renaissance style buildings that were put into place by the Medici family. They would hire people like Michelangelo, like Leonardo da Vinci, to come and make statues. This dome right here is a Florentine era, or a Renaissance era dome. Some of the most beautiful land, or one of the most beautiful cities on earth. Um, so during this period, the Florentines are paying artists to come in and paint things and make sculptures and write literature and do beautiful art in their land. And then eventually in 1494, the French come in at the request of the Milanese, and they kick the Medici family out of Florence. Well, Niccolo Machiavelli at this point, um, the David, yeah, Niccolo Machiavelli, um, no longer is an advisor to a prince, so he writes a book called The Prince. And in his book, he writes about how he thinks is the proper way to rule. And he says, it's better to be loved, it's better to be feared than loved, because he says, if your people love you, at some point you can do something that will make them hate you. But if they fear you, they'll always be afraid. Okay, he also says things like, don't do what's right morally, but instead do what's right for the country. Right? So sometimes Napoleon was famous for his reading of Machiavelli. Certain leaders today would suggest more of a Machiavellian style of leadership where we're not always trying to do what's right. Instead, we're doing what's right for the country. And oftentimes, what's best is to rule by fear instead of rule by being loved. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is right. I'm just saying that he wrote this book and it became very influential for future generations. Even to this day, like I said, there are leaders who think that Machiavelli was right on in his leadership style.